This webinar discusses curriculum concepts and teaching practices featured in the Affective Jacob's Ladder Reading Comprehension program, available from proofrock.com. Today we're here to talk about Affective Jacob's Ladder Reading Comprehension program. I need to introduce the folks that are going to be our guests today, and I have an amazing group of folks that I'm so proud to be able to introduce to you. The first is someone who I have known since I was in graduate school in the 90s. Joyce VanTassel-Baska is a foundational figure in the field of gifted education, and it has influenced gifted education in so many ways. The most impactful for me was her influence on curriculum and on the doc students that she sent it into the world, who've all been very successful. She is currently the professor emerita from the College of William and Mary. Well, let me back up and tell you that I was telling my wife this morning, as I look at what Joyce has done career-wise, every job that she has ever had for most of us would just be, well, we're done. Like that would be the end of our career because we would have reached a very high pinnacle. She was a teacher in high school teaching English and Latin. Then she became coordinators of gifted programs at Toledo, Ohio schools. Now see, if I were a coordinator in Toledo, Ohio of a gifted program, I'd think, well, I've done all I can do. That's amazing. Then she goes on to be state director of gifted programs in Illinois. Then she goes to create and direct the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University. Then she leaves there to begin the Center for Gifted Education at the College of William and Mary. She's had a storied career, influenced so many folks. Her doc students includes many of my authors, Tamara Stambaugh, Catherine Little, Bronwyn McFarland. She's just someone who is critical to our field. And I just thank you for joining us, Joyce.
My pleasure, Joel. You make me feel old, though, I must say.
I'm sorry, what, Joyce?
I said you make me sound very old.
That was not my intention. Well, do you remember when I met you? I was, you won't remember this, but I remember it because it's you meet a rock star when you're in graduate school and you think, oh my gosh, I remember that. I was in Victoria, Texas doing some in-service training, and you were there talking about curriculum, and the lady that was coordinating the event asked both of us to go out to dinner, and I thought it was like, I was so nervous, and you were just so gracious at dinner, and I think that started our friendship from that time on. But that had to be in like 1995 or something like that. So we go back a long way. Let me introduce Tamara Stambaugh. She is a associate research professor in special education. She is the bulk of her role is as director of programs for talented youth at Vanderbilt University. She runs day and residential talent development programs there at the university. She supervises a staff of something on the order of 50 folks, and you have 1,000 kids in that coming into the university for the programs for talented youth. She has authored several textbooks, authored many journal articles. She is also the first author on a whole series of curriculum we call the Vanderbilt curriculum units, and she came from the College of William and Mary, and she also was a classroom teacher. Welcome, Tamara.
Thanks, Joel. I'm glad to be here.
And finally, we asked someone a favor, and Margie, I owe you a debt of gratitude. Margie Campbell is the advanced academic resource teacher for 17 years experience in the Fairfax County Public Schools. She's a nationally board certified teacher. She delivers all kinds of courses and professional learning programs there at the district, and she is a Google certified educator as well. But she's also implemented the Affective Jacob's Ladder program online, and we were looking for someone to come in who is a practitioner that could talk to the ins and outs of using Jacob's Ladder in this kind of format. Margie volunteered, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you. Welcome, Margie.
Thank you, Joel, and hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks. So let me turn this first over to Tamara and Joyce and ask you So we've got folks who use Jacob's Ladder who are in this webinar and attending, but we've also got some folks who are just interested in Jacob's Ladder. So maybe if we could start off with you just talking about what is Jacob's Ladder, Affective Jacob's Ladder, and what is its purpose and design?
I think I'll get started with this anyway, and begin by saying that some of you may be more familiar with the Jacob's Ladder Reading Comprehension program, on which this was based. And it was a program, the initial one, to get students to move from lower order comprehension skills to higher order thinking skills, and to do so through a series of ladders and a series of rungs on those ladders to give them that notion of movement upward or dynamism in terms of their learning. So the affective program that's been designed based on that is one that really looks at different, 8 different areas of affective skill development. The areas that we associate with important areas for gifted and talented students to understand.
Joyce, can I interrupt? I apologize. A lot of folks are saying in the Q&A that they can't hear you very well. Could you speak a little closer to the microphone?
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was
right.
okay.
Is this
Thanks,
better?
Joyce. Yes, it is.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I was starting to say that affective ladders constitute and correlate very well with the affective skill development we would want in gifted and talented learners. So looking at things like developing identity and developing empathy are 2 important skills that are written into every curriculum plan and every affective development plan for the gifted around the country. But in addition to those 2 core areas, we also think it's important to focus on things like emotional development. And so there's a set of ladders that look at how we proceed with emotional development. There's one on coping with adversity. There's one on looking at risk taking. And then there's 3 that I would say are really important and kind of coalesce around issues of developing talent, including the looking at motivating to achieve and managing stressors. All of those are affective areas that Tamara and I picked out because, first of all, they're important ones for gifted education. But second of all, they also have a really strong psychological and educational theoretical basis that can be tracked back to individual theorists and their fundamental ideas about what's important in affective and social emotional development. We see then these affective skills as the important bedrock, shall we say, for the affective series. You may ask yourself, well, can I use them with my students? Can I use them with whatever kind of gifted learners I might have? And my answer to that would be, yes, you can. They were designed for use predominantly with students from diverse and underrepresented populations who had some interest in and need for these kinds of connections from lower order thinking to higher order thinking, and from lower order feeling to higher order feeling. And so the idea of the progression of the ladders is really important for those students, and it gives them the support mechanism that they may need to reach these higher levels. But in addition to focusing on that population, we also have found that they work very well with all groups of identified gifted learners, particularly at the grade levels we've designated. They also work well with students who may not be identified across the board as gifted, but who are very strong in verbal areas, as well as our twice exceptional learners who have a need for many of these coping mechanisms in terms of their uneven profiles, as well as their abilities within the verbal domain. And lastly, we also find that the program works very well with students who haven't been identified, but who you as teachers see as really promising learners, students who could do very well if they had just the opportunity with the right piece of text or the right kinds of questions to really excel and show what they're capable of doing. So we think that the program has that diversity of possibility relative to the student audience. The purpose of the program, as I've already really alluded to, is based on advancing both thinking to higher levels as well as thinking about these affective constructs. And I want to show you 2 slides now that sort of illustrate that from the standpoint of the affective skills I've already mentioned, but to show you what the rungs of the ladders look like. moving from the lowest rung, which usually is around awareness or understanding, to the higher rung, which has to do with specifically getting to, excuse me, looking at being able to deal with it within the context of transfer. That is, that students read about a character and see the characteristic or the situation emergent, and then they're able to see how that transfers then to their own lives and to the ways that they can apply these ideas to their own lives. So you'll see these two slides really just represent those 8 constructs. And then you see it here in terms of the visual that gives you a feel for what it looks like from the lower ladder rung to the highest ladder rung, and what we're trying to do in between in terms of student outcomes moving to that highest level.
And then another way to then think about this, as Joyce already alluded, is to think about it as sort of these twin pillars of thinking and feeling. And so we, just like you would think about if you're familiar with the other Jacob's Ladder program that focused specifically on reading comprehension, this, you want to think about Bloom's taxonomy and moving from that lower level to that higher level of thinking. So from that knowledge and awareness level up to maybe creating, evaluating, or synthesizing, with that application and analysis in the middle. And then we focus on each of those within those domains that Joyce already talked about, using the visuals that here. So you can see again, as she already pointed out, moving from that lower level to higher level in each of these different areas. And so I think another way to think about this is each individual ladder, you want to think about climbing from that lower rung to that higher rung. And so they're in most of the ladders, but not all of them, or most of the prompts, you can sort of follow this pattern of that bottom rung is awareness. And so being able to understand and comprehend what is going on in the story. What's the issue? What's the problem? What's the character's motive within a text? Are we aware of the feelings? Are we aware of what's going on? And then as we climb up the rung, we move to this idea of analysis. So students at this point would most likely, regardless of whether they're focusing on emotional intelligence, identity, or achievement motivation, they're asked to apply or critique their understanding of a character or a feeling. How did they feel about different words being used in the poem, or the character's response to a situation? And then finally, that top rung, what you'll find is typically an action. We're asking them to make a plan, set a goal, create a product, or in some way transfer maybe off of the page using the story as a catalyst into applying something to their own lives. And so within the program, what you see here then are sort of these key features and assumptions. We really want to make sure that we're creating a safe environment to talk about affective ideas. And so, and it's so much easier to do that if, maybe I don't want to talk about how I feel about this situation, but I can talk about that through a character's lens. So the character may be dealing with something that I'm dealing with, and it's just safer to talk about it in that way. And so we want to make sure we're linking those affective issues to texts that are really engaging. And we'll talk a little bit about the genres in a minute, but we tried to pick really engaging texts and media for students to really have deep conversations about, because it's only as strong as the piece that you select in terms of the questions and the conversations and discussions that you're able to get. We want to make sure that students are really reflecting upon themselves through the lens of the characters, and we're using those questions, those lower to higher level questions, as the vehicle for discussion and growth. And then finally, Joyce and I were extremely deliberate about trying to make sure that we have not only diversity of characters, of different individuals through biographies, diversity of message, and diversity of authors, to make sure we have that idea of mirrors and windows, where students can relate, where they can see themselves in some way as a mirror, but also have windows to the outside world.
often people think that if you focus on social emotional development, then you must be dealing with a topical area that's outside the standards. And so the only way you could possibly use this curriculum would be if you're not addressing standards. Well, interestingly enough, this curriculum addresses very well two sets of standards. On the one hand, it addresses the gifted curriculum standards that have come out through NAGC, particularly focusing on different aspects of social emotional development, which these ladders and their rungs represent. At the same time, it also focuses on the use of inquiry, both in terms of question asking as well as activity work that the students are engaged in, both individually and sometimes in small groups. And then finally, we're very concerned with the idea of talent trajectories, getting these students to understand not just where they are at this moment in time, but where they are in terms of their future development, their future programming, their future careers. So the gifted education standards are front and center in terms of how the curriculum was designed. Also front and center, however, as you see with the general reading comprehension program of Jacob's Ladder, are the English language arts standards. And I think that the Affective program does a particularly good job of focusing on the three areas that I've highlighted in this slide. The first is on the use of literature and visual media to really get students to think deeply about the nature of what they're reading and how they're reacting to what they're reading. The use of narrative writing processes, as well as some examples of persuasive writing, and communication through listening and oral discussion. So the standards are attended to in this curriculum and integrated and woven, we think, quite effectively into an integrative pattern.
Great. But Joyce, before I ask you guys to share some examples, let me just show folks the books themselves. So currently we have Jacob's Ladder for grades 4 and 5, and we have Jacob's Ladder for 6 through 8. Tamara and Joyce have been working on a grade 3 version of this, as well as a grade 2 version of this. So those of you who are teaching those grades, you'll have those books out in December. You can pre-order those on Amazon, and you'll get those very quickly with free shipping if you have a Prime membership. I've created a little special URL here to get you to the Jacob's Ladder books very quickly. If you want to come into our website, we will not have the pre-release books up yet. You'll need to go to Amazon for those, but we do have the 4 and 5 and 5 and 6. And I would mention too that as with most of Prufrock's curricular materials, we do give you permission that if you've purchased the book, we allow you to make photocopies for use in your classroom, or in this case, because we're working with Katie, we will give you the opportunity to upload those to the students in your classroom. So you don't have to buy anything else other than these books for your classroom. We've tried to be very fair. We're all teachers, and we know how that works. So we're here to support you. Let me turn this back over to Tamara. If you'll grab the screen, Tamara, because I'm going to ask you to give a few examples. If you display those examples for us, and we'll talk about what does it look like in the classroom.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about the genres first, Joyce?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, please tell us. So these are the areas where the literature is pulled from. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that, showing the examples. But so please go ahead.
Exploring what this slide is all about. And the only purpose of this slide is to let you know that we use different genres, partially to promote interest, partially because we think it's important that gifted students are exposed both to different readings, but also to different videos. And so we use the visual media as extensively, really, as we use written media in the context of the examples.
And so with that, we know that biography study and gifted education, as that's one way we're informed within the field, looking back at other individuals. That's also a big part of talent development and how we learn about, like what's the talent trajectory path that individuals took. So you will see different biographies of students. And again, we try to, or of individuals, and we try to make these or be very careful in our selections and make them relatable. And so one of the things we loved about Michael Phelps is thinking about him as a twice exceptional learner, number one. So trying to tap into that because it was he talks a lot about having ADHD, which made it challenging for him to focus, and that's how he ended up getting into swimming. And then also thinking about how he was really good, obviously, at what he did, knowing the number of Olympic gold medals that he had, but thinking about how did he maintain his focus, how did he continue to improve when a lot of times he was sweeping competitions, which sometimes we see, the students who have the straight A's in the class and never have to try. So we thought this was a very relatable piece. And so you can see here as one example of the ladder that focuses specifically on achievement, we really wanted to help students understand what were some of these personal characteristics that led to his success. So we wanted to focus on this talent development trajectory, as you can see starting here at the bottom, looking at his strengths and then moving up to helping them understand what some personal characteristics might be that led to his accomplishments, and then having that conversation with students about what personal characteristics do you have or that you could focus on that would continue to lead to your success. Another ladder, typically most of the pieces that we have will have one or two ladders at most. And so with this second ladder as a biography or focusing on Michael Phelps, we wanted them to understand this idea of adversity and how to overcome adverse situations, and looking at, again, him dealing with twice exceptionality, as well as just, sometimes we don't think of succeeding as adversity, but how do you maintain that sharp edge? And so I love this question where we really want students to focus at the top. When the major competition is yourself, how do you motivate yourself to continue to compete at high levels? What did Michael Phelps do to continue to advancing? What might you do to continue to advance if you're already making straight A's or you feel like you already know everything in the class?
In addition to biography, we also have included a lot of different poetry selections. One of my favorites from the grades 4 and 5 readings is one called Mending by Hazel. And I'm going to read it because I think you'd want to do that with your students as well, is to read the pieces out loud so that they can sound them out as well as think and feel them out. Here are old things, fraying edges, raveling threads, and here are scraps of new goods, needles and thread. An expectant thimble, a pair of silver-toothed scissors, thimble on a finger, new thread through an eye. Needle, do not linger, hurry as you ply. If you ever would be through, hurry, scurry, fly. Here are patches, felled edges, darned threads, strengthening old utility. Pending the coming of the new, yes, I have been mending, but also I have been enacting a little travesty on life. This is a great little poem, we think, because the central metaphor is so powerful in terms of students beginning to handle the ladders that we have created here. And actually to be a transition from poem to the ladders, we also have a set of while you read questions prepared about the poem so that you can be ensured that your students are understanding the poem as they're reading through it. But we have two ladder goals here that we think are really important. The one is based on looking at achievement patterns and the barriers to actual performance within achievement patterns, and getting students to engage in different activities related to that. One of my favorites with this one is getting them to realize that sometimes life just happens to you serendipitously, but other times you can really seriously plan for it. And so if you begin to think about your future, how can you begin to think about the kinds of experiences that would positively contribute for you to a very positive future in terms of a professional career? And so getting them to think about the sewing in of these relevant pieces and then reflecting on the pattern that's ultimately created. The second example of a ladder for this one is to again look at the idea of developing personal excellence, and how do we come about being able to do that? What does developing talent really feel like? So if we look at, again, going through the issues associated with what factors contribute or impede talent development and how we can apply them, to finally the last example here, which again goes back to the metaphor of sewing. In what way does the poet relate the idea of creating a life to the act of sewing? And then in a chart, students can begin to put together what those relationships might be, and then create a collage that sews together the pieces of their life to date, what it looks like now and what it might look like in 10 years. So again, talent development in the present, but yet looking toward talent development in the future as well. Another biography that we have included in the grade 4-5 book is a biography of a Black inventor who is best known actually for his work on pacemakers, being very successful in terms of making them utilitarian for a number of people in terms of their own life. And during his life, actually having come up with 24 patents. Ironically, he developed heart pattern or heart problems himself later in life and was not able to benefit from his own patent and died of heart failure in 1982. But what we learn out of his life is not only his successes, but also the adversity that he faced. And so one of the ladders that the students explore here is the whole issue of the Otis Boykins adversity situations and contexts. And so one of the things that we want them to be able to do in terms of not just understanding his adversity, but then on beginning to understand their own. If you notice the third example of the ladder, in what ways have you experienced diminished expectations, lack of opportunity, discrimination, or other adversity beyond your control? Describe how you felt, and then how you chose to cope with it. Again, students can use a variety of different product approaches to respond to that. It can be discussed in a small group first and then led into their individual product development. But a very important part of addressing and understanding how someone else's adversity might have meaning in terms of adversity that you've experienced in your own life. And then lastly, the other ladder related to the Boykin biography is focused on the achievement pattern issue. And this one I think is terrific in terms of the third example here, the third activity that we have for students, because it's the age-old argument, how do you fundamentally get ahead? Do you get ahead because you are so smart and so talented and you do it all on your own? Or do you get ahead because others have helped you at critical stages along the way? And so students can begin to understand through looking at Otis's life and then thinking about their own, what is the path to talent development? Making the argument on one side or the other and beginning then to share those perspectives with each other.
We also think that it's important to have media. So besides, we have short stories, poetry, biographies, but this is a Pixar short, Jerry's Game, and it's basically, and you have TED Talks and other YouTube videos that we recommend that you find as well. But for this one in particular, it's an older gentleman who's playing in the park, and he's playing chess by himself in order to gain his dentures back. And so there's no talking. It's just a short little clip that students watch and observe. And then when we look at the ladders, what we're trying to pull away here is this idea of being able to understand understand risk taking. And so we want students to understand how they think about playing by themselves, and when might you want to engage in working with other individuals or in reaching out and asking someone else to play. So you'll see the progression of the ladder, having them trying to figure out why is he playing by himself, and then create two different reasons why. Maybe it's just because he enjoys, he needs that time alone, or maybe it's because he doesn't know how to approach having a friend. And so what does that mean? And we think about that with some of our gifted students who may at times feel like outcasts. And so think about what skills or traits would he have to have then in order to reach out to someone else to ask him to play chess. So let's create a good and a bad example of how we might reach out in order to ask someone to engage with us. So helping them understand part of that social relationship that they might need. And then the second ladder that we have focuses specifically on empathy and collaboration. And so asking how do you engage in explaining how you feel? So maybe people you don't play with you. So if you look at that middle rung, right here, instead of playing chess by himself, what else might he have been able to do to communicate his feelings and engage with others in productive ways? And then moving to that top rung, how might collaboration with others then allow for a more productive life? So that idea of engaging in conversations or relationships with others and the importance of that.
Very good. Thank you very much to you guys. I really appreciate the idea of laying the foundation. And let me grab the screen back. Um, Let me also mention real quickly I mentioned this earlier for some of you that these are the books. If you this has come up in the Q&A. If you are if you're wanting the earlier editions or the earlier grades, you can buy those on Amazon. They're available for pre-purchase, and also you can purchase the 4, 5, 6, 8, and also you can get those from Proofrock if you like. Let me show you guys one other place before I turn this over to Margie to talk about some of the using this in a classroom in her experience. I mentioned this COVID response support page, and I also mentioned the licensing agreements. That has come up in the Q&A, and I wanted to clarify that once you get down here, do you see the Visit Our Permissions homepage? That's where you're going to be communicating with Katie. Request for educational use. You come in here, and you're just going to make an application for whatever you need. What pages do you want? You know, give her the information that she needs to be able to grant you a license. So that's the process by which you can request those permissions. So let me bring Margie in here. Margie, you have been using the materials both in classroom, but then also in an online format. And perhaps you could share a little bit about your experiences and help the teachers out to understand how it might be used in their settings.
Absolutely. I'm a true fan of this resource. And as a teacher, I think we can all relate. We're always looking for that resource that can do it all. And the Jacob's Ladder Affective units really do that. It is a tool that supports the whole child, as Tamara and Joyce have been describing. It's not just supporting deeper thinking around literature and media, but it's also asking them creative questions and engaging them with unique activities, while at the same time helping them to understand themselves and how they fit in around the world or in the world. So there's 3 main reasons why I selected this resource to use with my students. One, of course, is social emotional learning. The next would be balanced literacy. And beyond that, it becomes the implementation of that creativity and critical thinking. So social emotional learning is huge right now, always, but I think even more importantly, we're understanding that now. We and our students are living through a very unique and precarious time where all the things that we took for granted have somehow changed, and we're continually reevaluating what's normal. And that's not something that our kids are used to doing. So the Affective Jacob's Ladder lessons actually serve a dual purpose. They will help us make those connections with the students, as well as addressing these social emotional concepts. So first, talking about helping the students develop their connections within the class, those bonding moments that we're always looking for. If you're like me and in my county, we're starting the year virtually. So there's a lot of connections that we're missing. But using this resource will help you kind of dig deeper into the students, have them share their experiences and feelings. And reflect. Now, not all of our students have that skill of reflection, and it's definitely something that would help them. The second aspect is the aspect of social emotional learning are the questions around the concepts, as was said earlier: adversity, identity, motivation, empathy, stress, equity, and diversity. So I think as teachers, we can all see that these topics are very relatable, and not just in our current circumstance, but as thoughtful educators. So by exposing our students to these universal themes with rich literature and media, diverse authors and perspectives, we're helping to support a broad understanding of who our students are and how they fit into the world. And that brings me to the next reason why I choose the Jacob's Ladder to use with my students. Balanced literacy. So we're teachers, and we're always balanced literacy. The reading, writing, oral communication is a driving force when planning our lessons and meeting those instructional needs and standards of our students in our classrooms. So I've used Jacob's Ladder, the Affective, with students who are identified as high potential, students who are twice exceptional, and I've even found it so powerful that I've adapted it for use in lower grades. Now I'm excited that they're coming out with a new book for second and third graders, but I just want to let you know that it's also a tool that is adaptable. So again, universal themes are accessible to all students. In my school, I teach in a Title I school, and my population understands the concepts of adversity and empathy, and there's many entry points for all of the students to access. I look at the questions as sort of what we call a low floor, high ceiling, where all students can access and comprehend the themes, the morals, the concepts in the passages with varying degrees of support, or autonomy if you have kids that are ready to take it farther. So basically what I'm saying is all students can and will be successful. The questions on the ladders dig deep into the passages, into the students' thinking, and are full of cognitive conflict. Not all the stories and fables have a happy ending, as you'll see in a minute. I'll share the lesson that I worked with a small group of students. But the ladders ask questions that I honestly would not have thought to ask, and they're crafted in a way that elicit a certain engagement and discussion. So the third important reason why I use Affective Jacob's Ladder is because there's an ease of implementation of creative and critical thinking. Again, Joyce and Tamara had their finger on the pulse of what educators really need. The truth is, if we want our students to think critically, then we must give them opportunities to defend their thinking. In the questions, you may notice, and I'll share a couple ladders in depth in a minute, there's no right or wrong answers. The questions in Affective Jacob's Ladder, they deal with divergent ideas, characters with conflicts and challenges. And as Tamara was saying, they're not unlike some of the challenges that our students are having. So by working through it with the discussions, thinking deeper, the students are able to make a lot of connections to the text. And most importantly, again, share those conversations. The conversations, therefore, will support the students' emotional growth and understanding of the world around them. Now, it's all about timing. As you guys know, your time is precious. Your instructional time is valuable. And that's where, again, this Affective Jacob's Ladder is most helpful. Meeting our objectives in our standard-based instruction, as well as supporting the development of our students, is a social emotional learning. It's a win-win. So when I plan these lessons, I usually start as a whole group. We expose the students to the story, the fable, the video clip, whatever the media is in the lesson, because our ultimate goal initially is understanding. So without understanding, the students might have difficulty accessing the ladders. So this may require supporting the text with images. For instance, when I did the lesson, I did an Aesop's Fable, and there's a tricky part at the end that I wasn't sure that the kids would be able to visualize. So I actually shared a 2-minute video clip just to help support their understanding. Talk more about that in a minute. So you may need to support your students with word study. You may even have to practice retelling just to ensure that the students understand the passage and comprehend it. During the first lesson, I would share the ladder that I'd like the students to work with, and then I might send them off on their own to complete the questions and then come back together and share in a small group. The safety of that small group is really pivotal. Again, those conversations are really where the learning and growth happens. And after that meeting, we might come back together again as a whole group and just kind of reflect, or we might even extend with another ladder or another extension activity. So next slide. So here's this is the fable that I use with my students, and it's an Aesop fable. And the nice thing about this was that it wasn't the tortoise and the hare. It was something that the students were not familiar with. So right there and then, I have all my students starting on the same playing field. So in this story, really briefly, just to summarize, there's a man, a boy, and a donkey, and they're heading into a village to go to a market. As they're walking down the road, they run into some villagers, and the villagers complain. They're saying, hey, you know, why are you not riding on the donkey? So the man puts his son on the donkey, and they keep going. A little bit further down the road, they run into some other villagers, and they're complaining. Oh my gosh, look at this man, you know, he puts his boy on the donkey, and this old man is having to walk. So he takes the boy off and the man gets on. As you can see, it's going. As they go down the road a little bit further, some more villagers. Oh my gosh, this old man is riding while the little boy is walking. So again, they're thinking, how can we solve this problem? They both get on the donkey. Going down the road a little bit further, some more villagers complain, oh my gosh, this poor donkey. So what the boy and the man decide to do is carry the donkey. And again, this was the part that I did my lesson with early 5th graders. And I wasn't certain that they could visualize this, because what actually happened is that they kind of tied the legs of the donkey together and put a pole and then carried the pole. So here they're carrying the donkey. It's you can imagine it's not very comfortable. They go across the bridge and the little boy trips. The donkey slides off, falls into the river. Because his legs are bound, the donkey dies. So as I said, it wasn't a happy ending, but there is a moral. And the moral to the story is that if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. So the ladder that I gave my students to work with first dealt with adversity. So that was the objective, to see if the students understood. And as you can see, the way this would work, we started at the bottom. And even this bottom rung of the ladder introduced a new concept to the students, that idea of that third voice, the narrator, because the question asked, what were the main challenges the boy and the man faced, according to the man and the boy, according to the narrator, and according to the villagers. So here, on that most basic level, the students have to really identify the difference. But yet, again, for my new 5th graders, that idea of the voice of the narrator coming in and sharing the moral was really powerful. So then you go up to the next question. And the next question was, were the challenges the man and the boy faced more internal or external? So I have an example I'm going to share with you. Just most of my students, I had a group of 6 students. They mostly believed that it was an external challenge. Now, I was very pleased that this student said, you know, that the boy and the man were always trying to please other people. And that certainly was the problem. They were people pleasers. Maybe they had a fear of rejection. I'm not sure. But this in and of itself was a huge discussion. Why external? And then I realized that my students really didn't have an idea of that causal relationship, that interaction between what people do on the outside and what decision you make on the inside. So that gave us an opportunity to share. Well, they didn't have to listen to the villagers, but they chose to. So that was pretty powerful, an introduction of a new idea to the students. And then we went up to the F3, the top of the ladder. And in this case, the students had to rewrite the fable and come up with their own moral. So I have one example real quick I'll share with you. In this case, I won't read it, but basically the story is told the same way, except when the man and the boy confront the villagers, their first response is, no, we're fine, thanks. When they come across the villagers again, no thanks, we're good. Finally, when they come across the last group of villagers, the man, getting a little frustrated, asks, I can walk, can't I? And then the moral of this rewritten fable was that sometimes you have to ignore what people say. So the power of that was that it told me that the students really understood what the objective of this activity was. So I actually went on with these 6 students and I introduced another ladder to them. And that would be the ladder that deals with identity and looking at yourself, being a little more reflective. And the first example, H1, the students had to think about the character strengths of the man and the boy, of the man. And then how could that strength also be a weakness? Because we just said, it's that the man tried to please people. Well, how did that end for him? Yes, it's a strength, but it's also a weakness. But here's where the kids got to internalize it. As you can see, there's a second part to the question where the kids had to make a list of their own strengths and see how maybe their strengths could become a weakness. So I have an example, I hope. So this little boy did a great job of summarizing what the strength was of the man, and then looking at that strength that he liked to listen to people, and listening to people can be good when the advice is good. But unfortunately, if the people are giving you bad advice, it could be a bad thing. Now, what I love is that he went on to talk about his best traits and his strengths, which I love of animals, being kind and being persistent. So he said, being kind, if you're too kind, people can take advantage of you. And if you're persistent, and this was interesting, I never thought of this as a weakness, that you could keep working on something that isn't correct, and you're putting a lot of effort and energy into something for no results. So this, again, while the kids wrote this out, and you'll notice it isn't edited, it isn't a paragraph, it isn't a formal writing piece. It was really used as a launching point for the discussion. And the discussion is really where the power was in this. So that was my lesson. And then I'd like to reflect a little bit with you guys. I'm sorry. Then we went up to H3. We went up to the top. And I have to tell you, when I virtually met with these students, the first thing they said, can I share my haiku? Can I share? And when was the last time you heard your students say that? And what I love about some of the activities that Joyce and Tamara included, here we're doing poetry outside of the poetry unit. So I think that was really powerful. So I'm going to read this haiku, and I did not edit it. I'm going to say that the student has poetic license here, but what he wrote was, what the prompt is. It's remember a time when your purpose or your goal, when you kind of lost track of that, and you forgot what your end goal was, and how did that end for you? So this little boy wrote, while I sawed a tree, a friend came to talk with me. Now crush goes my car. Now, I would have edited and I would have said, let's change sawed to chopped, because he went on to share the story and he was so excited. It happened a winter here in Virginia. And I'm guessing that maybe there was some ice damage on his neighbor's tree, and his neighbor was cutting some of the damaged branches from the tree. And his father happened to talk to him. So while they were talking to each other, a branch actually fell and hit a car. So he was very excited. Most importantly, did he get the point? Absolutely. Another thing, another example that I'm sharing with you, and this was something I had not heard of before, a flash fiction. Here's where the students are simply to use about 15 words to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to tell a story. This little girl wrote, when trying to get something, I got distracted and got something else that was not what I wanted. Now, of course, that's the launching point for the discussion in that small group. And why I included that was because I think that's relatable for all of us. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the grocery store and been distracted by something and got something I wasn't actually looking for. So lots of connections, which really helped me recognize that the students understood what we were talking about. So to reflect, after the lesson, yes, I worked with an identified group of students with high potential, but I have to tell you, it was accessible for all students. I actually used the same story with a second grade group of students, but we, instead of going through all of the questions, we actually used it as a Socratic seminar. The themes are universal, they're relatable to all the students. It actually helps set me up as the teacher and the students for success. The entry point, the hook, the story, it was a novel story. None of my students were familiar with it. And they all really liked it, which was pretty amazing. The latter questions, of course, they support that higher level thinking and the analysis, which again, when we think of those standards and deepening our students' ability to comprehend was awesome. It also supported active engagement. There was a lot of student to student engagement, a little less student to teacher. I let the students take charge in the group, but there was also a lot of student to content interaction, and that's what we were really hoping for. The students enjoyed the process. They enjoyed themselves sharing their creativity and in the activities. I did have a small group that I worked with. They did have homogeneous reading levels, but different effort levels and different motivation levels. So even in that scenario, the students were able to kind of glean off of each other. There were excellent opportunities to develop their learning, our learning community, through these shared experiences. We were talking, a lot of our gifted students are highly competitive. So this was an opportunity to kind of lift the veil and let them all see each other and have those shared just social and emotional events and learning simultaneously. So my reflection, again, I was very happy that the kids showed mastery of the concepts that I was introducing, even though they were social emotional concepts. The mastery that they showed was directly related to the learning goals that I had for them, and they took positive risks. The students felt empathy, not just for the characters and compassion for the characters, and were connected to the characters, but they also made those connections to themselves. There was lots of community building. We all left our small group instruction feeling supported, and there was lots of opportunities to extend. And lastly, as we are teachers, there had to be some aspect of formative assessment going on. So I used a pair when I introduced when we had this small group discussion, and I did do some check-ins with them. For instance, I asked them, "How did you like the story?" And out of the 6 students, 4 of them liked it, 1 thought it was okay, and 1 didn't like it. But I have to acknowledge, she was pretty upset that the donkey died. So I think you might be able to relate to that. This was most surprising to me. When I asked the students, how did you like the questions? All 6 of the students said that they liked interacting with the questions. So that was just fantastic feedback. I asked the students, what do you think was the purpose of today's topic? And one student, most of the students all said, to learn a lesson, to teach you how to be kind to others. But one student said, to tell a lesson that is to keep your eye on the goal. So again, warming your hearts with these amazing reflections that the students did. I asked the students, can you connect to the topic of adversity? And one student shared, sometimes people kind of push, but not physically push me into doing things, but I still say no. So again, so you're seeing that empathy, that compassion, that thinking coming out from the students. And the students are talking about themselves, a topic that they know and are learning about really well. And then lastly, I asked them, what was the most important thing that you learned from today's lesson? And one student said, discussing the moral of the story so I can know what to do and what not to do. So yeah, as a teacher, it really leaves you with that warm feeling that you've done a great thing, not just teaching them instructional practice, good academic conversations, but also that social emotional piece. So thank you.
Thank you, Margie. I really appreciate that. That was great to get that feedback from the classroom. We're going to shift over. I want to provide you, before I turn this over to Katie for the Q&A, I wanted to mention that here's some contact information for Joyce and Tamara. I deliberately refused to put Margie's email up here because they are in the thick of it. I mean, my goodness, with the Fairfax schools going to online learning in just a few days, I think we'll leave her alone to do the work that she needs to do for those kids. But Joyce and Tamara said they'd be more than happy to field questions and that sort of thing. Katie, let me turn this over to you, and you can pose some of the questions, and we can talk a bit about them.
Yeah. Well, one of our top questions was, I mean, this is for all of you. How do you get students to elaborate in their answers when students want to rush through the questions?
Well, I'll be happy to start that off. I think one of the issues in terms of getting students to continue to discuss is to have probing questions available so that no matter what they say, you can add, well, why do you say that? Or, what do you mean by that? Or why do you think the character did this? You can have a whole list of maybe a half dozen of those probing questions that allow then the conversation to continue. It also helps to be able to make a connection from one student to another. So you hear one student make one kind of response, and then you say, well, why did he say that, John? And so again, getting a little bit more dialogue started within the context of the question. So I think that's one tool anyway I've used and I know does work with students at this age level.
Margie, did you ever have that issue where you've got a kid who's just like, oh, that's the answer, and it was hard to pull that additional thinking from the child?
I have, and it may not happen right away. Sharing, particularly talking about yourself, you really have to have that safe environment, and that might not be created in the first month of school. But as a teacher, you might want to start sharing, sharing how you relate to these characters, to these stories, and just really starting to create that environment. Giving the kids the ladders before we have our small group meeting gives them all an opportunity to have something prepared. And it might, like Joyce was saying, you might be able to coerce them a little bit to start sharing. Start small. Start with safety questions, have them talk about the characters, and hopefully eventually they will definitely open up more.
I have like one of the books right here, and I think just to piggyback off of what they said, I don't know if you can see this very well, but in the beginning front matter, you can see like we have question stems, kind of like what Joyce was alluding to as well, where you can start to post those on the wall. Things like, that's an interesting idea. Does anyone have something different to say? What in the story made you say that? Where on which page? Why do you? I agree with so and so. I disagree. And then the other piece that's in the book, let me find it again, is a discussion checklist. Again, I know it's kind of hard to see, but just showing students that so they can start to assess their own discussion with questions like, did I allow other people to talk? Did I add to an idea? Will also help start to train them in those conversations.
This is
One of the other questions, oh, sorry, Joyce.
That's okay. I was just going to add that this is an area where wait time is really important also, because sometimes teachers will get discouraged and think that the student isn't going to be able to respond. So they'll quickly go on to another question. When in reality, it's the right question. It's just that sometimes students need a longer period of time to think about it. And so being sure that you're kind of sensitive to where the kids are coming from, and the fact that it would take more time than maybe a typical kind of program would, is important to keep in mind.
That's kind of related to my next question. How many pieces of each ladder are students meant to do for each story? Or kind of related to that, how long does that usually take?
We had a slide actually to talk a little bit about that, but I think it's important that teachers know that you should at least take one period in order to do one ladder. The reading piece and the ladder, whatever you intend to do, that will take you a period, either 45 minutes to an hour. And then if there's a second ladder, as there are in most of the readings, that's going to take probably a second period. So Margie, I think when she talked about the Aesop's Fable, that took, a couple of different periods, also with individual student time in between working on their own. So I think that it's important to kind of plan out these into, I would say for any given reading selection, you might want to have two different periods to think about having available to do everything. If you're going to do all the questions, if you're going to do all the activities, that would be reasonable.
And I'd also like to add, I know, just here, like, just even thinking about online is, as many of us may find ourselves teaching online, sometimes what it takes twice as long, at least that. I don't, Margie, you could probably add more to this too, but I know just in my teaching online, it just seems like everything takes a little bit longer. And so, it may be that you introduce the story on one day and then they're typing like their ideas into a Google Docs or a discussion board thread. And then the next day they're coming back and you're bringing that up and you're talking about it in more of a Socratic seminar kind of setting, or they're posting some of their thoughts on Flipgrid and commenting, with other individuals. And so, in an online setting, it could take two or three online classes if you're using discussion boards or think, pair, share, or small group discussions. So I think, we're all kind of learning how that works, but I've found it to work, fairly well in an online setting too.
And how often do you think teachers can use this resource in the classroom? And maybe Margie, this is a question for you too right now. Just how do you implement this and when?
Yeah, thank you. So definitely at least once a month, I think is my goal. Uh, I use a lot of the Jacob's Ladder, not the Affective, but I use the Reading Comprehension program. And using that, I would plan to do it at least once a month because, again, you want to give the kids the opportunity for those critical thinking skills to develop and that academic conversation. With the Affective, particularly in this environment, I would not rush through any one of these because what you're doing, you're going to meet a whole classroom full of new students, and you want to get to know them, and you want to have that bonding moment. So early this year, I would probably pick a couple of these and really dig deep into them. Go through the rungs of the ladder, go slowly because it is new to the kids and you might need to model a lot of it first. But really accessing it, really looking deeply at the thinking involved. I don't know. I would probably try to do maybe one, really stick to one lesson, one passage, one reading material for a week or even two, and then jump right into your next one, so that the kids are used to again thinking that way.
Yeah, Katie, maybe we've got time for maybe one more question.
So there are a couple questions on here. We talked a little earlier about how, there may be no right or wrong answers in the affective books. There were a couple questions, about why do some of the Jacob's Ladder books have answer keys and the other ones don't?
take that one, Joyce? Or
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I didn't think we had answers. Tamara, we don't have answer sets, do we?
I think the first edition did.
I'm
And
sorry.
after that,
Oh,
I think the first edition did, and then after that,
Okay.
we saw
I
just
was
because
going to say that I knew that it came up
Yeah.
at some point, but I didn't think that we've done it in recent times. And
Mhm.
we'll just say why. I mean, it's sort of intuitive based on what we've been talking about. You don't want to signal to the kids that there is a right answer, and you don't, as a teacher, want to suggest that you have that right answer. What you're really doing is trying to encourage discussion and deeper thinking. And that's why, again, the constant use of question probes, rather than you're jumping in and giving answers, letting the kids ultimately come up with those ideas, is pretty critical. And I think answer sets get in the way of that because they make it sound like there's a pat algorithm to how you should read a story and how you should think about a story. We think we've set it up through the questions and the activities. We've given enough direction, shall we say, or enough guidance for both teachers and students to know how they need to be thinking about a text. And from there, we want, again, the student as reader, the student as learner, to begin to explore it on his or her own.
yeah, and to clarify for those of you not familiar with the history of Jacob's Ladder, so we had first editions at one point, and then we went back a couple of years ago and we released second editions of everything over on the Jacob's Ladder side, and then the Affective Jacob's Ladder are new, so they conform to the newer format. I also wanted to mention there was a question about, do we need to buy a book for every kid? Absolutely not. We give you permission as the teacher who's bought that book. You can use that with the kids in your classroom. For the most part, the kids can write their answers as Tamara mentioned in some of the online collaboration writing tools. So they can also write it on a piece of paper. There, you can use these materials with just one book with one set of kids in the classroom. We wanted to make that fair. So I want to pull this to a close and thank all of you guys. We had we had about 300, which is typical. If you have 600 register, you have 300 show up. And even after I said you don't have to stay, we still had 200 people stay. So thank you guys for sticking with us. I know this is so crazy busy. We've got kids at home, and we're all trying to do online learning and everything else. And so, golly, I just so appreciate your effort and time here. And then to our panelists, Margie, Joyce, Tamara, and Katie, thank you so much for coming. Oh, we sure do appreciate you guys.
It was my pleasure. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. But bye-bye, everybody. You guys have a great day. Thanks again.
Bye-bye, Joel.